Redditors, what is the most fucked up thing you have ever done? Story number 1. My grandmother moved in with us when I was a teenager and started to go senile. Our relationship quickly soured. Living with her was different from sending her letters and making phone calls. It wasn't her fault. You change when you start to lose your mind. But honest to goodness, I couldn't stand her. Everything was my fault. Every single thing she misplaced, I stole. I must have stolen it. She couldn't accept that she just couldn't remember where she was putting things. The worst time, she had a meltdown over photos she'd misplaced and had my parents search my room while I shouted that I never touched them. I was a teenager. Why would I want her photos of the garden? I could just go outside if I wanted to see it, for fuck's sakes. One night, I woke up because she was shouting for me in that nasally trill she always had that I'd grown to hate because of her constant theft accusations. Just my name over and over. She was in the bathroom across the hall from my room. I didn't know what time it was. I figured it was early because she always got up at like 5 a.m. I figured she was shouting for me because she misplaced something again and was happily accusing me of going into her private bathroom that I never went near and taking it. So I thought some very angry choice words at her and pretended I didn't hear her. She called for me for 30 or so more minutes until it finally woke up my mom. I figured now mom can deal with you and I can sleep. Well, turns out her kidneys had shut down acutely. She was vomiting and excreting blood that whole time, yelling for me, not to tell me I was a little thief again, but because she needed help. She was 85. That 30 minutes probably didn't make a difference, but she died a few days later, and while I know it wasn't my fault, her extended suffering was. I'm sorry, Grandma. Story number 2. I'm a recovered heroin addict, 9 years sober, and I have a lot of stories of how much of a person I used to be. I really can't gauge what my worst moment would be, but I can post a story or two definitely. One day, I was flat broke and on my last bag of dope. My neighborhood pharmacist just recently was arrested for a DUI. Brainstorming, I came up with an idea to try and get some pills at the ER. I still had med insurance at the moment, so I thought this was my best option. My buddy came by, and we were hanging out outside smoking a cigarette and trying to figure out how to get hurt, just enough to get some pills, but not enough to actually have permanent repercussions. There was this big cinder block beside my garage, and I decided to drop it on my foot in hopes of just breaking a toe at most. I stood outside on the concrete patio for about 5 minutes with the cinder block, trying to hype myself up enough to drop it on my foot. I couldn't do it, psyched myself out too much. I told my friend that he would have to do it for me, and he agreed. He held it about waist high and dropped it on my foot. I knew it wasn't enough damage, so I told him that he needed to put it up higher and drop it again, to which he did. So go to the hospital, tell them that I was carrying boxes downstairs to the basement and dropped them when I slipped on the bottom stairs. So I go back, get x-rays, and I am in the waiting room. Doctor comes in and tells me that I've torn numerous ligaments in my foot and probably would hurt less if I had just broke my foot. Hearing this, I was excited, thinking, yes, I just scored. I didn't care about the pain at the moment, just happy that I just potentially scored. They release me and hand me a script. They wrote me a script for ibuprofen 800 milligrams. Defeat. So, the lesson here is, don't drop a brick on your foot trying to break it and get pills from the ER. It doesn't work. Story number 3. I'm gonna rat my little sister out. During our parents' divorce and custody battle, we were forced to sit in on family counseling sessions. I was 12 and she was 8. We thought my mom was acting funny and might have been banging the counselor on the side for her own personal testimonial interests still not confirmed. So we were pissed off because we loved our mom and our dad. It seemed like the counselor favored our mom over our dad, and it got rough sometimes watching him become outed by the only 2 adult forces who didn't love him in this world. Anyway, my little sister and I were left alone in his office, and she decided she was gonna take a shit in his little trash can to assert dominance. It was asserted. We never went back. Story number 4. My God, this was an embarrassing one that I hope no one ever finds out. One night a few years ago, we, my boyfriend and his family, get Chinese food from our favorite little place. For some reason this night it doesn't sit well with me. An hour after eating, I get that intensely sick feeling, like you have to poop so bad that you want to throw up. Whenever I go upstairs and destroy the bathroom. It's important to note there's 2 bathrooms upstairs and none downstairs, which is like a little apartment where my boyfriend and I stay. After I'm sure my balls are empty, I go back down to lay in bed. Thought I could nap it off. About 30 seconds after laying down, I get the urge to go again. I run upstairs, and to my horror, both bathrooms are occupied. His sister is refusing to get out of the shower, even though it's an emergency, and his dad is blowing up the other toilet, presumably suffering a similar fate to mine. I begrudgingly go sit in bed and contemplate my options as the bubbling in my gut grows worse. Bust down the bathroom door and traumatize his sister. Make the 30-minute drive home? No, it was urgent. I even thought about shitting my pants against my will and dealing with the embarrassment. God, I don't want to subject my future in-laws to that. I begrudgingly realize my only option is to go outside like nature intended. Their yard is very open, and it was a super bright moonlit night, so there was no place to do it without feeling super exposed. Except for under the trampoline. My thought process was, no one has used the trampoline for years, and it's out of sight or walking range, so no one could accidentally step in it. Great. I do my business, get soaked in the process. It was slightly raining and the trampoline was pouring water on me. Clean up with napkins and wet wipes, come inside. Immediately throw up in the trash can from the shock, embarrassment, anxiety, and sickness. Clean that up and immediately go to bed. Everything was fine for a few days, until my boyfriend's dad lightheartedly tells me how he was late for work that morning. The dog had rolled in some shit, and he had to get a bath. I felt like throwing up all over again, but thankfully everyone just suspected it was some type of animal poop. Story number 5. My hometown is generally pretty middle class to poor. There's a bunch of rich people that live in the woods, and one of them had a kid that went to our high school and bullied the fuck out of the kids that weren't as wealthy. That shithead grew up and bought a Camaro last summer and removed the muffler so it would be the loudest fucking thing in town. On New Year's Eve of 2021, he decided to ruin a town tradition and lapped the town common with it during the tree lighting ceremony, while people were caroling and giving thanks. Summer of last year, me and a friend decided it was time to get revenge because nobody wanted to do anything about it. My friend's dad owned a junkyard, and they recently got an old train horn from a busted diesel that ended up there. We spent a good week getting it set up in the back of his work truck and decided to wait on it for a little while. A month or so later, we found out he was having a party of some kind with other rich folks in his family, but we didn't know what it was about, so we carefully parked outside his house on the opposite side of his fence. Right as it was starting, we blasted the train horn and peeled out before anyone knew what happened. News got out later, and we found out the party we bombed was actually a wake for his late grandfather. Story number 6. I don't know if it's that fucked up, but it's something that follows me round and that I regret deeply. When I was in my late teens, I worked for a care company that went into people's homes to support them, mostly the elderly. I met a lot of sweet, interesting, and sometimes pretty mean people, but my favorite was Joyce. I was a pretty fucked up kid with a crap home life, and Joyce was well into her 80s, but I don't know, we just clicked. She was a genuinely cool person to spend time with. A friend. I'd start to go round to hers in my breaks rather than just sit in my car, and her voice would light up through the buzzer when she knew it was me. I'd make her sandwiches and cups of tea, and we'd smoke cheap cigarettes, and she'd tell me stories about her late husband building their home, and how she was a dressmaker who made dresses on the side for trans women or men who just wanted to wear dresses because, in her words, who cares if you're not hurting anyone? She was awesome. She was often my last visit of the night, so I just clock off when done, then stay late to do her hair. Joyce had daughters who lived close by but rarely visited. I remember her saying it was nice of them to drop off some Christmas dinner in Tupperware one time so that it could be heated up in the microwave, and my only thought was, why wasn't she sat at your table? There was also another carer I'd never met, but who she spoke highly of. It broke her heart when she found out he'd been stealing from her. Joyce would ask me that if I was ever to quit the job that I would tell her first, I wouldn't just leave her. I'd say of course, and if I do, I'll come and see you anyway. but I never did. I never saw her again. One night into a work shift, something happened, and I was rushed into hospital and had to abandon my shift. I managed to notify work in time, but I was in hospital for a while and then unable to work for months. I never saw Joyce again, and in her eyes I abandoned her. And I guess I did in a way. I thought about her lots and about going up to visit, but there was always something. I was recovering. My boyfriend was abusive. Then eventually, will she recognize me? It'll be weird now. It's been too long. What if she's passed? That was 12 years ago, and it still gnaws at me from time to time. I saw a lot of super upsetting things and spent time with a lot of forgotten people. Call your grandparents, your parents, if you can.